Thank you, thank you, thank you, Muriel. That was beautiful. Well, as you all know by now, it is Mother's Day. And I'd like to acknowledge all the mothers in the room and listening online, and for all the the work that you've done over the years for your children. And also, I'd like to acknowledge those folks who wanted to be mothers, didn't like the mothers they had. Anybody have a perfect mother, by the way? But anybody who this is not the happiest of holidays. Both are welcome here, both sides of this. Because each of us has our own perspective. You know, I do too. And my perspective on mother has changed over the years. It was one thing when I was younger, growing up. It was another thing when I was a teenager, right? I knew everything. And you know, a young adult and a mother and a grandmother. And so my perspective has changed, and yours does too. And as I do in preparation for a talk, I do research. I love that part of getting ready for a talk. I can't tell you how much research I did for this. Piles and piles and piles and piles. And I got myself so confused. I didn't know what to do. So you know how you call a friend or you call someone? I called Reverend Kelly Isolo, who's my friend and speech coach, and she said, "You don't have to talk about Mother's Day." And I went, "Really? All this work was in my head." No. She said, "Actually, many churches, many places aren't actually speaking about Mother's Day." Well, then I thought, well, what am I going to talk about? And we did this little exploration process about what was alive and what was really going on for me. And, you know, in the quiet, I heard this strange message. You won't lose control if you put your burdens down. You won't lose control if you put your burdens down. Well, that hit home because of two things, control and burdens. And I was wondering, you know, like how they might be related. Why is it important to recognize that we have burdens, and how can we lay them down and find the joy by not feeling that we have to be in control of everything? So what are the burdens that we're carrying, and how does that relate to control? Well, the first thing is to consider all the burdens that you might be carrying, whether they relate to you personally, the family, the world, politics, finances. I mean, the list goes on, you know, of things that we can take on, sometimes on purpose. Sometimes we don't even know that we're carrying all these things with us, but gradually it gets kind of heavy and we feel weighted down. And the form of burdens, I think, comes up with worry. You know, we worry about this and we worry about that and whatnot. And so I'm wondering if you might try a little experiment with me. If you think of something that is a burden for you, or that you're worried about, or that's on your mind, if you think about that for a minute, bring it up, and then notice where you might be feeling it in your body. For me, it was my shoulders. A lot of people carry tension and worries and burdens in their shoulders. And so notice that, and then the invitation is to maybe take a breath and think about just letting that go and rolling your shoulders back a little bit and just kind of releasing that and seeing if you don't feel a little better after doing that. You know, many of the burdens that we carry are really things that are outside of our control. You know, we've planned a picnic and we worried and carried. What if the weather is bad? We can't control that. We can't control what our family members might be doing. My son, who will go nameless. No, it's all right. He's a big guy, and I would advise him. I would worry about his health and that, and I would advise him. And finally, he said, "Mom, give it up. It's not going to make it." It was damaging to our relationship, actually. So I gave it up, and I couldn't control it. He was going to do what he was going to do. He's an adult, and that's just an example of something that we really can't control. But I was carrying that burden, that worry about him and his health and all of that. So is anybody out there a control freak? I claim that title as well. The thing is, if we release that worry, the fear is that I'll be out of control. In other words, the burdens and the worry create an erroneous link in the mind sometimes about things will be out of control. If I don't worry about it, if I don't think about it, my life will fall apart, the world will fall apart, everything will fall apart. It's not really true, but that's the feeling. The image that comes to mind for me of out of control is a car, waving my car, I'm driving down the hill and I'm curving around and the brakes are gone and suddenly, there's a crash and that's the feeling of not being in control. It's not true, and so that's what we work with in this practice of releasing control. And I learned something in my research, that there's a difference between controlling, and that's, again, what I was trying to do with Matt, trying to control something that's not controllable, and that's a fear-based thing. The other is being in control, and I would say that that's more of a relaxed, love-based thing. So if something happens in a particular situation, I'm confident that I can handle it in a positive way, can respond to it. So why do you think it might be important for us to recognize when we've picked up too many burdens? Well, if most are familiar with the Serenity Prayer from the anonymous groups, and it's, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I realized I could put control in there, and it works just fine. and yes, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't control. So then that comes to, well, okay, what is my responsibility in relation to my burdens, And I think about, you have to go back a ways in time. There's that song by the Hollies, he's not heavy, he's my brother. And he says he's not a burden because it's done out of love. And so I think that that's the difference for us, is it feels like a burden if it's a have to, if it's just, that slogging along thing. Whereas a responsibility or something that we take on with love to help another person, to do good in the world, out of love, we have that capacity and that divine energy within us to do those things. Dr. David Hawkins, who was a psychiatrist and became a spiritual teacher about consciousness, said this: out of compassion for myself, I'm willing to let go of that which brings me pain and suffering. So pain and suffering, I'm hanging on to it. I'm willing to let it go. Then the next thing he said was, out of love and compassion for myself, I won't be so linked to it that if I let it go, I'll be in a state of grief. So sometimes we identify with our problems and our burdens, and part of that kindness and gentleness and willingness to ourselves is to freely release it and recognize that that's not who we are, our problems. So this may be a tricky one for us control freaks, you know. Joy, happiness, and peace of mind come from relinquishing control. And it's a process, and I will say that over the years I have found that to be true, but it's not always apparent and it's not always easy. So the question then becomes, as we release control, then we're in the present moment and there's uncertainty. We don't know exactly what the future's going to be. We can't control it. But that's where our faith comes in, where we recognize that we are not alone, that we are surrounded by the love and peace of God. And it's that faith that I believe allows us to release and let go of the control. Philippians 4, verse 6 through 7, the Apostle Paul writes, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." In other words, we can lay our burdens down. We can put them aside and know that our needs are met, that we are loved and cared for by God. And we have that Christ presence and Christ consciousness within us to move forward through whatever difficulties we may be facing. So then how do we put our burdens down and find that joy and not having control? And really the first step is that willingness, and that comes up over and over again. We have to be willing to release what no longer serves us and let go of the things that we can't control. And the way that I see this process is starting with willingness. We move then through to a place of being okay. And we get there by our spiritual practices, by journaling, by prayer and meditation, by walking in nature, maybe by talking to a trusted friend or a counselor. But we move through that troublesome situation or burden, and we come to a feeling of being okay. Well, from this feeling of being okay, we then have spaciousness and room for us to grow, for us to practice some self-care, to practice some self-compassion. And to be accepting of what is. So, Martha Creek, who many of us know here at Unity on the Bay, has come as a guide and spiritual teacher, and she's a favorite around here. She says, you know, in her way of self-compassion and expression, she calls it the "oh honey" practice. So anytime you catch your inner critic saying something harsh, gently interrupt with, "Oh, honey, we don't talk to ourselves that way anymore." Southern accent optional, but encouraged. So what we come to recognize is that happiness isn't out there. It's found in here. And when we get a true sense of that, spontaneously, happiness and joy and freedom arise. So one of the ways that we can anchor this in ourselves is to practice gratitude. And we here at Unity on the Bay are grateful for all of you. We love you. We appreciate your presence. And the flowers and the plants on the tables are our gifts to you. So please take them home with you. And, Brené Brown says, it's not joy that makes us grateful, but it is grateful or gratitude that makes us joyful. I'm going to say that again. It's not joy that makes us grateful. It's gratitude that makes us joyful. So for those of you that are online, you can write a note or text a note. And the invitation for us here is there are cards on the table. And we're going to take about 2 minutes or so to write a note to someone that you are grateful for. Someone who has inspired you, someone who has shown you kindness, someone who you admire, someone who you love. And if you address them, there's a box in the back, we'll mail it. If you don't want to address it, put it in the box, we'll put it in our prayer box and offer that in prayer. Someone you are grateful for. Someone who has inspired you. Someone who has shown you kindness. Someone who you love. Express that gratitude. Let that smile, let that love come from your heart onto the page. Someone you are grateful for. Someone who has inspired you. Someone who has shown you kindness. Someone who you admire. Someone who you love. So let's come back and we'll wrap up. You know, we may be carrying burdens that aren't ours to carry. And those burdens may lead to stress and tension in our lives. And we are willing, little by little, to put them down and to let them go. If we try to seek control out of that which is not ours to control, we diminish our chances for happiness. And so we can recognize that as we optimize, we can optimize our chance for freedom and for joy by putting down our burdens and applying our spiritual principles and practices. You know, it is never too late to lighten the burdens that we carry. There is always an opportunity, each and every day. The happiness, the joy, and the love that we experience through these practices light up our being. And as we walk through the world, people notice that. It's contagious. I believe you don't even have to say a word. Just that smile and that glow on your face. People will get it. They will catch it. And I think that's a beautiful thing, to spread love and joy. We have no idea how far those ripples will go. And so my prayer and wish for each and every one of you is a happy and beautiful day, week, month, year, and spread it around. And so it is. Amen.